Hello, friends, and Happy New Year. Welcome to our study of the book of Joshua. I'm happy to have you with us. In this video, which is number 2 in our series, I want to cover some of the highlights of the first 2 chapters of the book of Joshua. I want to talk about Joshua's preparation as a leader in chapter 1, and then I want to talk about Rahab in chapter 2. Now, as you know, this book is all about the conquest of the land of Canaan and then the distribution of that land to the 12 tribes of Israel. And before the people can take the land that God has promised to give them, they must make preparations. But before the people prepare to enter the land, the leaders must make preparation. And so God encourages Joshua in Joshua chapter 1, as he would encourage any leaders of his people. Now, you might remember that Deuteronomy precedes the book of Joshua, and the last paragraph of the book of Deuteronomy says that never since has there arisen a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. He was unequaled for all the signs and wonders that he did in Egypt. There is Moses' epitaph in the last paragraph of Deuteronomy. Then we come to the book of Joshua, and Moses is gone. And the people must surely be wondering if they can take the land of Canaan without Moses. Joshua himself must be wondering if he is up to the task. Will the death of Moses cripple the nation in their efforts to take the land? And is Joshua a worthy leader? Well, God's aim in chapter 1 is to encourage Joshua, to reassure him, to let him know that he can certainly take the land. And how does he encourage Joshua? Well, let's take a look at verse 3, where God says, Joshua, every place that your foot treads, I have given you that land, just as I promised Moses. And then in verse 5, no one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. And as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. What wonderful reassurance. And then there's this wonderful passage, I will not fail you or forsake you. I will not leave you. How does God encourage Joshua? By promising him his continual presence. And Joshua will learn that it's not by his military prowess or even by his certain competencies that allow him to take the land. It is God's presence that allows Israel to take the land, God's continual presence. And based upon that promise, 4 times God will tell Joshua and the people of Israel in chapter 1, be strong and courageous. Be strong and resolute. Do as I have commanded you to do, because I will be with you. There's no reason for them to be weak or timid, for God is with them. And if God is with you, well, how can you fail, right? Of course, in this context, God is promising that Joshua will succeed as a military leader, and the people of Israel will take the land. So we're not going to stretch this success story to every conceivable idea that we could think of. I don't think this is a passage for athletes to use, for example. Well, God has promised me success because he's with me. No, this is a specific promise to Joshua. But we can surely take encouragement from this passage, can't we? Even today, we can import this very passage into our lives. God says, I will not fail you. I will not forsake you. God is with us, just as many New Testament passages teach. And then God reminds Joshua that it's very important that he commit himself and the people of Israel to obeying his will. He calls for the scrupulous obedience of that will, and we can learn from this too, can't we? I don't want you deviating either to the left or to the right, God says. I don't want you deviating in the slightest way from my will. I want you to be sure to keep all of the law that I command you to keep. And he says, I want that law to be on your tongue day and night. I want you to meditate upon it day and night. Those are good words for us too. Those have application for us too. Now then, let's hurry on before I run out of time to chapter 2, where we meet Rahab. The first task of Israel is to conquer Jericho, and Rahab is the key to that. She was a foreigner. She was a Canaanite woman, and the text tells us she was a prostitute. And she demonstrated Such faith in God. Notice chapter 2, verses 8 through about 11, when the two spies come to Rahab and she provides them protection. And then she says, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and the dread of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt in fear before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites that were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. As soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no courage left in any of us because of you. And then I like this confession. The Lord your God is indeed God in heaven above and on earth below. Now, that's quite a confession for a Canaanite woman, because she was accustomed to having many, many gods. But in this particular context, she says, I know who the real God is. It's your God. I wonder how she heard about that. I wonder how she heard of these stories about God's victory and what God had done with the people of Israel and leading them through the Red Sea. I don't know. But this is an expression of faith on her part. She is doing much more in these words than saving her own skin or saving the skin of her family. She is acknowledging that this God that she had heard about was the one and only true God. And by the way, Rahab's faith is mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. She's a heroine of faith. She's in the Hall of Fame of faith. And her faith is also mentioned in James chapter 2. And furthermore, she's mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1 with 4 other women, Tamar, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary, and all of those women but Mary were foreigners who became part of Israel. And I think this probably reflects the inclusiveness, don't you, that was intended in the covenant to Abraham, where God promised to Abraham that through him all families of the earth would be blessed. And Rahab is fulfilling that promise that God made to Abraham. The story of Rahab is not only about a foreigner's faith, but it's also evidence of the Bible's pattern, don't you think? The Bible's pattern that shows God working in unexpected ways. Who would have thought that God would use a prostitute, a Canaanite woman, to save his people and to conquer Jericho? And then we have the story at the end of chapter 2 of the crimson cord in the window. She said, we'll put this crimson cord in the window so that you'll know that all of those in my house will be saved when the walls come tumbling down. A crimson cord, a Canaanite window, a crimson cord in the window, a Canaanite woman, a prostitute at that. Doesn't God work in unexpected ways and through unexpected people, often the poor, the disadvantaged, and the outcast? He does that today as well, doesn't he? Sure he does. God is at work, friends. Let's have the faith and courage to join him in his work. And remember, he will never fail us or forsake us. Let's not forget that. And with that in our satchel, let's move out. Let's be strong and courageous, because God will never leave us. All right. I'll see you next time. God bless you in your study of the book of Joshua.